Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn, University Belonging, Engaging College Students Over Time and at Different Types of Campuses with Dr. Nidia Ruedas-Gracia. My name is Vanessa Jones-Black, and I'm the VP of Marketing at UThrive Educational Services. Before we jump in, I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce our organization to those of you who we may not have had the opportunity to partner with yet. UThrive Educational Services provides proactive mental and emotional wellness solutions for college students to help manage stress, become more resilient, and thrive. Today, we welcome UThrive Educational Services key contributor, Nidia Ruedas-Gracia. Dr. Ruedas-Gracia is an assistant professor of educational psychology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Research in her lab, Gracia Lab, seeks to develop a nuanced understanding of what it means to belong and how the sense of belonging impacts life outcomes such as academic performance and mental health. Together with her research team, she focuses on exploring these concepts among culturally diverse populations and examining how sense of belonging is associated with various social identities. Before we begin, I invite you to please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and throughout the presentation to ask any questions that you may have, as we will leave a few minutes at the end to respond. And with that, I will turn it over to Nidia.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks for the introduction as well. I'm going to start my timer because I'm a talker, so I could go on forever. But all right, so I will pop up my screen here. Okay, so thumbs up in the chat or something if you can see the right screen. It's my title screen.
It's perfect, Nidia.
Thank you very much. Okay, all right. Thanks. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about university belonging or college belonging. So I'll use both those terms interchangeably. And I'm going to focus a bit more on thinking about belongingness over time and how it can or cannot change over time, and also talking and thinking about different types of campuses that where belonging takes place and where we might see this. So for today, I'm going to try to get all of this in my 20-ish minutes. Thankfully, I have a few more minutes, so hopefully I get this on time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me just to situate ourselves, and so you know a little bit about the person that's going to be talking to you for the next 20-ish minutes. And then we're going to talk about sense of belonging in terms of what it is. So I'll go through the definition, and I'll talk about also, what the literature has been saying about how it changes over time. And then I'll talk about how we foster it. So really thinking about how we as either practitioners or scholars can foster sense of belonging in the different campuses that we're at. And so I actually did a lunch and learn a bit ago for UThrive. And so some of these topics, especially like the first one in terms of conceptualizing belonging, I will speak about enough to get us situated and grounded here. But I think there's a recording for the previous lunch and learn. And so if you want to like get into more detail about that one, definitely go check that out. But don't worry, I won't gloss over it too much. I'll definitely talk about it in depth today. All right. So first about me. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So I'm living my best Midwest life. I identify as Mexican American from Los Angeles, California. And throughout my whole educational journey to getting my PhD, I was a first generation low income college student. So these identities really painted and molded my experience in college and my eventual interest in sense of belonging. I'm also very family oriented. So I put a picture of me, adoringly looking at my mom on my birthday. So we took a picture there. But that also really colors the way that I think about belonging and the way that I think about psychology and psychological phenomenon. So being connected to family at all times is a different experience that has really kind of shaped my educational journey, but also how I think about these topics. So you'll see that pop out in a bit. And then I know oftentimes I get questions about like where can you find some of my latest articles or where can you find some information about what I'm doing and where I'm at. And so I just popped in my website there. So if you go to ruedasgracia.com, you can see my latest published articles and you can also see a little bit about like current projects that I'm working on and different kind of aspects of my career. And then sometimes I say important things or funny things on social media. So I popped in my handle there, Nidia Gracia. And I know it's X, but it's taking me a while to switch over from saying Twitter to X. So that's supposed to be X, I guess, instead of the little bird. But that's where you can follow me. And sometimes I'll post about my latest publications there as well. So that's a little bit about me personally. And research wise, I really have two prongs, I would say, of research. So my first one is that I explore sociocultural factors that impact academic performance, mental health, and physical health among culturally diverse groups. So I do a bunch of research on these sociocultural factors, and I italicize that because specifically related to this talk is that one sociocultural factor is sense of belonging. So I've been focused on sense of belonging and how that impacts academic performance, mental health, psychological well-being, physical health, all of that among culturally diverse groups. And the goal of the first prong is to use that research to inform, develop culturally sustaining interventions for these minoritized groups. So eventually using what we learn and what we've already learned to inform actual interventions that can help and support these students. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll jump into sense of belonging. All right, so sense of belonging, what is it? The general definition is that it's the experience of personal involvement in a system or environment so that persons feel themselves to be an integral part of that system or environment. And I italicize the words that I feel are a bit important to think about as we think about sense of belonging. Now, in a lot of the work that I've been doing, I like to continuously highlight and also annoy my students in my sense of belonging class by reminding them that there are different contexts that one can feel a sense of belonging to. And you can feel these in different levels and in different ways depending on the context. So you can have a sense of belonging to your school, to your college, to your country, to your race and ethnicity. And we've published on each of these different contexts or written up something that's been out there in the world about each of these contexts. So you want to also remember that as well when you think of sense of belonging, that it's not just sense of belonging generally, but you always want to be specific about what context you're interested in. And it can even be a context, a subcontext in college. So for example, your sense of belonging to your classroom or your sense of belonging to your major. And so when we think about fostering sense of belonging, it's important to think about the context that we're interested in as well. So for this presentation, we'll focus, or for this Lunch and Learn, we're focusing on sense of college belonging. And college belonging or university belonging, um, sense of university or college belonging is students' perceived social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of connectedness, the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the group or others on campus. And again, I italicized what I feel are important words there, especially when we're thinking about how to foster it. If you're thinking, how can I make this individual or this student group feel a sense of college belonging, you might want to think about whether they feel connected, whether they feel like they matter, whether they feel like their group is accepted, respected, and valued. And so when we think about those words, it kind of helps us a little bit to think about how exactly we're making people feel like this or not feel like this. And you probably already know this, so I won't spend too much time, but sense of college belonging is important for degree persistence, college graduation, psychological well-being, so many things, so many things. And so that's why it always gets a lot of attention. And we're always, it seems like a lot of times we're talking about it a lot. And it's for a reason. College belonging is really important for a lot of things. Okay, so some newer work, some newer literature is starting to delve into whether belonging changes over time. So I know that anecdotally and in our real lives, we might be able to see and understand that it actually does change over time. But a lot of the literature has been cross-sectional, so it looks at maybe first year students and it asks them about their sense of belonging at the end of their first year and ties that to degree persistence and psychological well-being. But it's less often the case that sense of belonging is tracked over time. And so those studies, some of them from our lab, those studies that have looked at sense of belonging over time show that, in fact, college belonging might be increasing over time. For sure, it changes for many college student populations. And for some of these student populations, it can actually increase when interventions are implemented. So that's, a positive sign, I feel, because it shows that even if you have low belonging at one point in time in your college career, there are some interventions that we can use that can boost that belonging. And then more recent work has delved into whether it changes in the same way for everyone. And so instead of just clumping all college students into one sample and seeing if it changes over time, if sense of belonging changes over time, we've seen that it just changes differently over time for first generation college students, for women, for those of different racial and ethnic identities. And so my little cute roller coaster here, the orange roller coaster, is what I start copying and pasting into slides whenever I talk about sense of belonging changing over time. Because some of this literature actually shows that sense of belonging can fluctuate. And for some students, it can be a really smooth roller coaster, maybe one of those at Disneyland. It's cute, it's fun, there's nice music in the background. And for other students, it can be a roller coaster. It can be like what I compare to an emotional roller coaster. It can go up and down. It can be high, it can be low, depending on different things throughout your whole college career. And so that's a very different experience than a Disneyland roller coaster, right? You might be at Six Flags and it's just wild and scary, and you don't know what you're gonna get until it dips or until it goes up high. And so I like this kind of image of a roller coaster to kind of explain that there are different types of students in college, and these different types of students are experiencing sense of belonging over time in different ways. So it's important to remember that. And then I'll try not to spend too much time on this slide. Every time I practiced, I spent way too much, but I also want us to remember that college belonging can look different by college campus. So oftentimes, if we're like, I'm faculty at a large land grant university, public land grant university, that's a PWI, predominantly white institution. And so that's kind of my world, right? I go to campus, these are the students I see. And then also my friends who are practitioners or staff, they're at their campus, and that's kind of, their mind frame around students. But I want to remind us that there are all kinds of different campuses. So there are public schools, private schools, 2 years, 4 years. There's commuter schools. There's land grant universities. And importantly, there are also ethnic racial minority serving institutions, which we call MSIs. If you haven't heard about it, I'll talk about it very quickly here. So MSIs is this umbrella term for um, institutions that serve ethnic racial minorities. And they're broken up into a few different ones. I listed some here. But it's important to note that each of these, even though they're all MSIs, each of these were created in different ways. Um, they are assigned their label in different ways. They cater to different types of students. And some of us might not even know that we're in one of these. And so if you're thinking about sense of belonging at your campus specifically, think about whether, it is classified as an MSI or not, and what type of student they're serving. So for example, very quickly, we have historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. HBCUs were foundationally created for Black students because Black students were not allowed to go to college in other schools. And so these colleges and universities were created for specifically this ethnic racial minoritized group. And when you step on many of these HBCU campuses, you can tell, right? It's very much a place where Black students can positively develop their ethnic racial identity. They are not in the minority for the most part, right? Yes, okay. They're not in the minority. They're not the only, Black student in the class. And they can really kind of focus on their education. And even their education is catered and mindful of Black history in the United States. Now, in contrast, Hispanic serving institutions, they are not necessarily created fundamentally for Latinx or Latina populations. They get that designation once there's a certain percentage of students who identify as Latinx that are enrolled in that university. So it might not be the case that there are a bunch of services and policies and practices that are supportive of this group, but it so happens that there's a critical mass of Latinx students. So that's different from how HBCUs were created. Not to say that there aren't HSIs that have a lot of support for Latinx students, because there are, but that's just a different way that this label is placed on universities. So it's important to understand too the history of your institution and your campus. And aside from the MSI umbrella, we also have mission values, clubs and organizations that these campuses invest money in and have as part of their tradition. So some institutions will have first generation college student centers or commuter lounges, and that really shows to that population that this university cares about us, they understand us, and they are here to support us. So these are all signals of belonging that happen around campuses. So it's important, again, to identify your institution and its history and what type of campus it is. All right. And then I also wanted to very quickly post this figure. This figure is in our paper on belonging over time. It was published in 2023, last year, yes. So this pretty flower is, I'll go through it really quickly. We explain it in the paper. But it reminds us that college belonging can also look different by student identity. So regardless of which campus you're on, you add the layer of these students' identities. And the fact that, so what we have here is that each petal can be a different identity, a different student identity, and these petals overlap. And so you can have people of different races and ethnicities, and also people, for example, of different gender identities. And those intersect in different ways. And so, for example, my experience as a Latinx woman will be different than someone's experience as a Latinx man. And even though we're both in the umbrella term of Latinx, we will have different experiences based on our gender. That are different than, for example, someone that identifies as a white woman or a white man. And so we got to also think about these identities and how they overlap and how students are experiencing their college kind of life within these identities, within these campuses, and then over the time that they're in college. So it's getting deep, I know. So after all of that, you're like, well, how do we foster it? So we have a couple of articles that we've published on trying to simplify and trying to come up with some easy to read rules for creating a sense of belonging and supporting different types of students. So we have one where we have 10 simple rules for creating a sense of belonging in your research group, and you can adapt this to different organizations and clubs as well. So even if you don't have a research group. Um, and then we have another one for successfully supporting first generation low income students in STEM. And these are QR codes that will take you to those articles. Don't worry, on my thank you slide, I popped them back up again. So if you didn't get to them now, they come back. The QR codes come back in our pop up in our thank you slide. So with these 10 simple rules, when you look through them, one thing that I want to remind us that I talked about, for a while now is that you got to remember time and type, right? So time can change over time. Sorry, belonging can change over time. And something that I wanted to highlight is that first impressions are important. So in the literature, we found that that first year experience is important. You want to make sure that you boost that sense of belonging right away in the first year. However, if you miss the boat and now you have sophomores, juniors, et cetera, with low belonging, boosting belonging during the later years can also be effective. So we have seen that happen in literature and in intervention work. And remember the type of college, right? Remember the type of student and how that all intersects, the type of college and the type of student. So for example, you can have first gen low income Latinx students at an HSI. What does that look like? And we have something in press where we talk about that. So again, this roller coaster and this pedal arrangement situation. And I just wanted to pop this up. Um, Vanessa, how much more time do I have?
You can keep going, Nidia. You have probably like 5 more minutes and we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A.
Okay, perfect. All right. So then I can talk a little bit about this one. So this is in one of those 10 simple rules articles. So I wanted to pop it up real quick and talk about it a little bit. So if you click on that QR code, you'll go to this figure. So no need to memorize it. But we laid out these 10 rules and I wanted to go through them a little bit. So the first one is reflecting on belonging. And what I mean by that, or what we mean by that, is also think back to that definition. That's why I had a whole slide dedicated and I italicized the important words because sometimes it's as easy as going back to the definition. Thinking about, whether your students feel respected, accepted, valued, whether there is a sense of social support on campus for them. If the answer is no, then there are lots of ways that you can start fostering that specific thing, right? Making sure that their identities are valued and respected is amazing, can take you a long way. So step one is to reflect on what belonging actually means and keep on reflecting on that throughout time. So, you create a club or you fund an initiative or you put on an intervention. After that and during it, keep on reflecting, right? Am I actually making students feel like they are accepted and respected via this intervention, via this programming, et cetera, et cetera? We also talk about being mindful of names, pronouns, and diverse identities. I cannot tell you how many times I'm at dinner or at the grocery store or in a class or in a meeting. And if I bring up the power of pronouncing someone's name correctly, it always gets a conversation going. If you have a name that's always pronounced correctly, I'm very happy for you, but you might not understand that there's some of us where our name is always butchered, right? And so for someone to take the time to practice our name and get it right, it can do wonders for someone's sense of belonging. And I could talk about this. I actually talk about it for a whole lecture in my class. We talk about names, but understanding people's names, pronouns, and diverse identities is also a signal of belonging because you took the time to truly understand that person, and that can go a long way. You want to also proactively engage with your lab members or your students, wherever the setting might be. Actually, proactively engaging with them can also do wonders, makes you more relatable, but there are also these organic conversations that can come up. And so that's always very helpful. We also discuss, document, and embody values. So oftentimes it's kind of just assumed that we all have the same values in a certain setting, but actually discussing them and documenting them and playing them out can be very helpful. And it can help get students and staff on the same page about what our values are, and then obviously, consequently, help students feel valued. Um, the next one is to be transparent about expectations. So whether you're in a lab or whether you're in a club, what do we expect from each other? And not just, come to class or come to these meetings, but like if I'm serving as a mentor, like let's set down my expectations for myself, right? Like, so I'll ask my students, like, what are you expecting from me? Do you want me to email you 5 minutes after you send me an email? If so, let's discuss, right? But what are our expectations here? Like, do you expect me to share about my day to day, or to do you expect to shadow me while I do some data analysis? Like, what is it exactly that we are expecting from each other? Again, being on the same page, showing that you respect what their expectations are, and that you're willing to have a discussion. And the other ones here, I'm sure you read through them, but we explained them also in the article. Just building in time to foster these connections outside of your research group or outside of class, providing opportunities to learn about each other. So I have a storytelling project that I assign in my class every semester, and that one's amazing because we very quickly learn a lot about each other through this storytelling project, and we do foster connection through it as well. Um, the last one that I wanted to highlight, they're all important, but number 9 is to conduct equity checks. I think when you're working with minoritized student populations, it can be very easy for kind of biases to creep in, and it can be very easy to, for the workload to not be balanced, for there to be invisible labor. And so, even though we have our expectations and our values set up, I think it's important to periodically conduct equity checks, right? In my lab, there was always one person who was like, I'll take notes, right? And they were fabulous note takers. But that's a lot of work to be the note taker at every single meeting. And then turns out that they never had time to actually talk to us about their research because they were always taking notes on everybody else's. And so equity checks, I feel, are really important to rebalance the workload and make sure that people do feel respected and valued, and yeah, just kind of rebalance how much work everybody is putting in. So I love equity checks. I try to do them as much as possible and check in with everybody, make sure that we're not, overworking certain people, or that we're not indulging in invisible labor that is not rewarded, or is not kind of spread or shared across groups. All right, so whew, I made it. Hopefully we have some time for Q&A. My contact information is up there again, and I told you the QR codes were coming back. So if you want to learn a little bit more about those 10 rules, and our explanations and descriptions of it, you can look at, I think that one is in the 10 simple rules for successfully supporting first-gen low-income students in STEM. I think that's where that one is. But yeah, here are the QR codes. Thank you all so much. And I'm looking forward to answering some questions.
Thank you, Nidia. That was amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, as well as everyone else who came to our webinar. We will stay on. Someone did ask, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everyone who attended. So in case you want to come back and reference anything, you will have that. And we will stay on for a little bit to answer any questions that come in. I see that there is one already in the Q&A. Haley asks, I am also interested in learning more about sense of belonging for online adjunct faculty. Do you have any recommendations or connections related to that aspect of belonging?
Yes, so I did teach an online class, and I tried to incorporate ways to foster belonging. I got good feedback on it. I think the quick one that I'll talk about is that storytelling project. And if you email me, I'm happy to send the rubric. But basically, everybody in their own, using their own medium. So it can be a PowerPoint presentation, it can be a painting, it can be a poem, it can be a song, however they like. They tell us about their educational journey and how it's been shaped by any of their social identities. And so each student goes off and does it on their own, and then they post it in we have Canvas, I guess. They post it, and so everybody watches it as an assignment throughout the semester, usually early on. And so then you get to learn and read about different students' experiences. And it just feels a little bit like you know who's in the class. And you can provide comments on it. Like we do a lot of activities around it. And so I would recommend that as a way to foster connection, and lots of other ways. So I'm happy to just send me an email and we can talk about other ways to foster belonging. But I think that has been a successful project that has gotten good feedback. There's another
Um,
question in the chat.
do you see that idea about fostering a sense of belonging for students from the active military community of veterans?
Yes, and then there's one before too, about imposter syndrome. So I can get to both of those.
Great.
Uh, yes, I think that's also a minoritized population in college that, there's just not that many support systems or organizations or clubs. And coming from active military or veterans, that's a different college experience. And so I think that it's on the universities and the colleges to think about how they can better support these students, and provide like social supports and spaces, and also kind of understand what does a schedule really look like for active military and veterans. What other kind of responsibilities might they have, right? So it's been, I think that when we look at their sense of belonging, it does tend to be quite low, but I don't think it's because they necessarily, are not putting in the work. I think that there's just much less, you have cultural centers and you have all these wonderful supports for first gen students, but when it comes to active military and veterans, you see a lot less. So I think that there can be more that can be done there. And then it relates to imposter syndrome. I don't think it's an outdated term. I think that it's definitely something that's happening, and actually writing a paper on its association with sense of belonging. So, if you are active military or a veteran or a first gen student, or a student parent, right? You may feel imposter syndrome at these universities and these colleges. And so it's even more important to right off the bat, or if you're a transfer student, like there's just so many minoritized identities in college. And so it's even more important off the bat to kind of boost that belonging from the get-go so that it can really kind of be sustained over time. So I think that it definitely relates to sense of belonging. How are we on time here?
We're a little over, so I do want to respect everyone's time. Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I did put a registration link in the chat. We are hosting a learning lab next week in case you're interested in learning more about how to bring the topic of belonging to your students. We will be featuring content from You Thrive Student Solutions. And again, we will be sending out a recording of this. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we hope to see you again at an upcoming event. And with that, I'm going to end our webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.